HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder on the Trans-Siberian Express by Stuart M. Kaminsky, read by John Mclain.
Prologue. Catch a train direct to death. Glide where wheels and rails caress. Hear the last taboos expressed, in language looted and compressed. Abandon this world for the next. Cross the great plain of forgetfulness. Trans-Siberian Express. Siberia, 1894. The 6 men trudged into a thick forest of birch and aspen trees, so dense that this gray morning had the feel of oncoming night. The permafrost had started its slow thaw, and their ragged boots cracked through the glassy upper layer and sunk an inch or so into the earth. Had they not each been carrying a body, they would probably not have broken the steamy surface. Boris Antonovich Dermansky kept walking when he heard the blast of dynamite no more than 3 miles away. The blast was followed by the distant sound of raining rocks from the wounded mountain. It was a familiar sound. Boris had lost track of how many mountains they had ripped through, how much frozen ground had been torn up with dynamite, how many bridges they had built. He walked on, shifting the nearly frozen naked body on his shoulder. Boris was the biggest of the group, and the only one who was not a convict. Though it had not been specified by them, a dark little bull named Hentov rasped, "What's wrong with here?" Boris strode on, moving through the scattering of men. Here would have been fine. It really didn't matter where they dropped the bodies, but Boris was in charge. He had to make the decision. There were thousands of miles to go, and his survival and reputation might well depend on how resolute he was. Many had died, from the plague, disease, landslides, floods, anthrax, tigers, a wide variety of accidents and fights. The engineers and bosses who died were boxed and shipped to Vladivostok, or back to Moscow to be buried as heroes of the Tsar's grand plan to unite Moscow with all of Siberia, right to the coast, only a few hundred miles from Japan. It was to be the longest railroad in history. It was to be the most expensive railroad in history. It was to be a tribute to the royal family, to the memory of Alexander, to the triumph of Nicholas. Boris cared nothing for the royal family. He cared only for his own family in Irkutsk, for warm clothes and enough food to eat. He had been among those in the crowd 2 years earlier, on May 31st, 1891, when the Vladivostok station had been declared open and the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railroad had officially begun. Tsarevich Nikolya Alexandrovich, the heir to Emperor Alexander III, laid a stone and silver plate to commemorate the undertaking. There had been applause. The white gloves that Nicholas had worn to lay the stone had been taken off ceremoniously and placed in a jeweled box, which was carried away by the mayor of the city to be displayed in a place of honor to be determined. "What's wrong with here?" asked Stem. Boris kept walking. He did not turn around. They would either follow him or kill him, drop the bodies, and go back saying he had fallen in a hole or been attacked by a bear. No one would know. No one would check. There were more than 80,000 men working on the railroad. Hundreds died every week. "I said, what's wrong with here?" Stem repeated. Stem had been in a St. Petersburg prison for theft. He had also committed 2 murders, but had not been caught for those crimes. The other convicts had come from all over Russia. None had been asked if they wanted to die building a railroad. None had been promised anything more than food and work and time, perhaps years, away from prison. Boris walked on. "These corpses are diseased," another man called to Boris's back. We're breathing in their death." Actually, only 4 of the dead bodies had been superficially diagnosed as diseased. 2 had died in accidents. A second blast, louder than the first, shattered the morning. Birds went silent to listen. "There," said Boris, continuing forward toward an opening before him. He moved slowly to a trio of rocks, large, almost black, each the height of a man. He dropped the corpse he was carrying in a small clearing next to the rocks and looked around. Silence. Streaks of sunlight, not many, came down like narrow lantern beams through the tree branches. It was the right place, a natural cathedral. Boris had imagination and intelligence he kept hidden. There was nothing to be gained by the revelation of either, and much to be lost. He was Big Boris, good-natured, a loner, not to be crossed. When he fought, he was ruthless and violent. When he talked, which was seldom, he kept it brief. Boris turned to face the 5 men, who moved toward him and followed his lead, dropping the bodies not far from the dark rocks. One man shivered with the loss of his burden. Another tried to rub death from his shoulder. There was no talk of burial. The wolves and other animals would come quickly. There would be only bones before a week was out. Stem looked at the jigsaw pile of bodies, made a V with the filthy fingers of his left hand, and spat between them in a gesture of peasant superstition which Boris ignored. "A prayer," said Boris. Some of the convicts laughed. One turned into a paroxysm of coughing, a hacking cough which suggested to the others that he might be among those on the next pile of the dead. "Go back, then," Boris said. "I have a message for the dead," Stem said. "Save a warm place for me. May there be large women in hell. May there be a hell to welcome us." "Stem's a poet," called a man named David, who had a large lower lip and the look of an idiot. "Go back," Boris repeated softly, knowing that their show of false courage in the face of lonely death needed punctuation. "I'll join you." The men started back through the forest. Boris remained behind. No one looked back at him. Let him say a prayer. He wasn't one of them. He wasn't going to run away, hide, try to find a village or a hunter to take him in. None of the 5 convicts even considered escape. They knew better. Boris did not pray. He watched till the men were no longer slodging ghosts in the mist. Then he quickly removed the package from his pocket. The package was narrow, small, animal skin bound with strips of leather covering a metal box. Boris moved quickly behind the 3 rocks, searching for some safe place, some protected niche. He spotted it quickly. Luck was with him, though he had been prepared to make his own luck. There was a thin opening in the rock on his right, a little above eye level. Boris knew his package would fit. It would be tight, but it would fit. He had a good eye for such things. He wedged the package into the space as far as it would go, and then found a handful of small stones to cover the opening. He cracked through the permafrost with the heel of his boot, and scooped up cold mud, filling in the cracks. He worked quickly and stepped back to assess his work. It was close to perfect. He knew it would be. He had planned, practiced. He stepped away from the 3 rocks and the white corpses without saying a prayer. The dead needed no prayers. If there was a God, he would take those he deemed worthy. No entreaties from the living would make a difference. If there was no God, then prayers were only for the living who believed or wanted to protect themselves in case they might someday believe. He moved quickly, straight, his boots no longer cracking the icy surface, now that he had relieved himself of Yakov's corpse. Boris knew exactly, within feet, the number of miles they were from the next planned station. He knew the range of hills and low mountains, and had chosen this spot and this moment because of the distinct shape of one of those nearby mountains. He had seen the mountain the day before, when there had been some sun, and the mist had drifted away. He had missed one opportunity a week earlier. There had been another burial detail scheduled. Boris could not volunteer. No one volunteered for corpse carrying, but he had known the detail was coming and had stayed near the weary section boss, who usually simply looked up and pointed to the nearest men, assigning them the duty. The section boss, through dull, heavy eyes, had simply missed Boris in spite of his proximity and size. So Boris, his dangerous package tucked deeply and safely inside the lining of his jacket, had to wait. And then this morning's chance had come, and the signs had been there, the mountain, the location. He committed distance and signs to memory. They were not complicated. Later, if he lived, he would return. If he did not, he would give directions to his wife or his brother, or whoever remained of his family, though he doubted anyone but he could find the place again. Boris moved back toward the train quickly. He caught up with the 5 convicts, whose pace had slowed once they had left the dead comfortably behind in the clearing. "You said your prayers?" asked Stem. Boris nodded and grunted. "If you have to carry me someday," Stem said suddenly, solemn and very softly, "say the same one for me." "I will," Boris said. "You have my promise." When they got back to the camp, they smelled something cooking. It was familiar and not welcoming. A huge vat of soup or gruel, made from whatever stock might be on hand, and whatever animals, if any, the hunters had found. Boris had once found a whole mouse in his bowl. Others had claimed to find even worse. There was a stir of activity among the men both outside the railroad cars and within. People were shouting. Armed soldiers, rifles in hand, hurried in pairs and trios alongside the tracks. Through the frosted windows, Boris could see men being stripped naked, uniformed soldiers watching over them. He saw one man bent over, spreading the cheeks of his behind so a teeth-clenched soldier could examine his opening. "What's going on?" one of the convicts who had been on the burial detail asked. "Search," said a cook's assistant with a big belly. The assistant was smoking a cigarette and glancing back. "Something's missing. They won't say what. They've torn the camp apart, gone through the train, everything. They decided I haven't hidden whatever it is up my ass. Now it's your turn." "Shit," said one of the convicts. "I'm going to hide till they're finished." "You cannot hide. Better get it over," the cook's assistant said. "Can't serve food till they're done. And they give you a red card when they finish with you. When they've gone over everything, we all stand in line and return the red cards." "What the hell is missing?" asked Stem. "The crown jewels?" "How would the crown jewels get on a track-laying train in Siberia?" answered the cook's assistant. "Then, who knows?" said the cook irritably. "Maybe some government official or a general just went crazy, lost his wallet or his pocket watch. Just get it over." Boris stepped ahead of the group and moved toward a trio of soldiers who stood before a shivering quartet of naked men. One of the soldiers went through the pile of clothing. The other 2 soldiers were giving careful examinations of the naked men. Boris looked up at the frosted window of the train car a few feet away. Inside the car, a thin, naked man was dangling from a bar by a rope tied around his wrists. At his side stood a very short man in a heavy black wool sweater. The short man was whispering to the dangling man, who struggled to keep his head upright. Boris's eyes met those of the dangling man, and Boris gave a small nod. By the time the short man had turned to look out the window, Boris was but one of a group of more than a dozen men. "You!" called one of the soldiers, pointing at Boris. "You are next." Boris moved dutifully forward. Part 1. Day 1. Chapter 1. Chief Inspector Porfiry Petrovich Rostnikov stood at the window of his office, with a reasonably hot cup of strong Turkish coffee warming the palms of his hands. The sun glowed like a dying bulb through gray clouds that hinted at a first snow of the season. He looked at the 2 pine trees in the courtyard of Petrovka, the central police headquarters in Moscow. Petrovka was named for Petrovka Street, which runs in front of the 6-story U-shaped white building, just as Scotland Yard in London and One Police Plaza in New York were named for their addresses. He had 10 minutes before the morning meeting with Igor Yakovlev, director of the Office of Special Investigation. He took a sip of coffee. It was strong, and that was good, because the cold gray winter sky of early morning suggested not even a hint of warmth. The biggest unit of the Moscow Criminal Investigation Division is the Investigative Directorate, which includes 14 investigative divisions, including theft, plunder, and murder. The 15th unit, the Office of Special Investigation, exists for one thing only: to deal with those cases which no one else wants, because they are politically sensitive, unlikely to be solved, or offer little promise and much potential grief. The young man seated in front of Porfiry Petrovich's desk looked down at the sheet of paper in front of him. A name was written on the sheet. Rostnikov had not spoken the name aloud. His office was wired. Everything said within its walls was recorded on tape in the office of the director of the Office of Special Investigation. Rostnikov knew this, and Yakovlev, known as the Yak, knew that his chief inspector was aware of the recordings. The Yak had survived the reshuffling of the former KGB, the fall of the Soviet Union, enemies both political and personal, and had come out with information that could embarrass many leaders in government, the military, intelligence, and business. The Yak had worked with and knew Vladimir Putin from the days when they had both been with the KGB in Leningrad, which was now St. Petersburg. The Yak could have insinuated himself into a higher office, but he had judged that his time had not yet come. Leaders fell too quickly. Patient and cautious bureaucrats survived. And so he had asked for and been assigned the Office of Special Investigation, which, under its former head, Colonel Snitkinoi, the Grey Wolfhound, had been largely ceremonial, that is, before Rostnikov had been transferred to it from the office of the Moscow procurator. The Wolfhound had been promoted to head of security at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, largely as a result of the success of the Special Investigation Office under Rostnikov. The Yak had stepped in with the goal of adding to his well-protected collection of incriminating tapes and documents, while building his reputation as a man who could get things done without embarrassment. Rostnikov and the Yak had a distinctly symbiotic relationship. The Yak protected Rostnikov, who often stepped on the boots or polished shoes of those in power, and Rostnikov and his team provided the Yak with a series of successes and connections to grateful victims and offenders. And so, not wanting to put on tape the name that was before his son, Yosef, Rostnikov had written it out. Yosef Rostnikov, the most recent addition to Porfiry Petrovich's team, had understood. "Find what you can about her," said Rostnikov, looking out the window at a man in a knee-length leather jacket, briefcase in hand, hurrying through the guarded iron gates below. "She doesn't want the children," Yosef said. "She says that she does." Rostnikov said, turning from the window and moving to his desk. There was only so long that he could stand on his metal and plastic left leg. It was far better in many ways than the withered one that he had dragged around since he was a boy, but the lost leg had been like a crippled child. He could talk to that leg, urge it on, cajole it. This piece of alien material had no soul. Sometimes Rostnikov admitted to himself that he missed the pain of the lost limb. He could, of course, visit the leg whenever he wished. It resided in a large jar, in the second level under Petrovka, in Palanin's laboratory, a jungle of books, jars, metal containers, tables, and equipment that might well have been antiques salvaged after the fall of the castle of Baron Frankenstein. That was the way Palanin liked it. Palanin, who talked to corpses and collected their spare parts and assorted objects of metal, wood, plastic, and bone. It was widely believed that he had Stalin's brain well hidden among the rubble. Rostnikov's leg was in good or bad company, depending on one's view of Stalin. At one point in his youthful zeal, Porfiry Petrovich had, as had most Russians, seen Stalin as a near god, a father, a man who deserved the name Man of Steel. Porfiry Petrovich had named his only child in honor of Stalin. Not many years afterward, Rostnikov had regretted his decision, but his son had by then worn the name well. The name on the sheet of paper before Yosef Rostnikov was Miriana Panishkoya Ivanovna. Miriana's two young daughters, Laura and Nina, along with their grandmother Galina, were now living in the one-bedroom apartment of Rostnikov and his wife, Sarah, on Krasnikov Street. It had come about like this. Miriana had simply walked out on her children, leaving them with her mother. The grandmother, who was 64 years old at the time, had done her best for them on an insignificant pension and odd jobs. Then, one day, in a state bakery, she had been turned away by the manager, a petty tyrant. The grandmother had begged for bread. The manager had grown loud and foul. The grandmother, in a state of confusion, had shot him with his own gun. The grandmother had gone to prison, and Rostnikov and Sarah had taken in the two girls while she served her time. Now the girl's mother was back. "She wants money?" asked Yosef, pocketing the sheet of paper. "That will be the next step," said Rostnikov, seated but not wanting to settle in, because it was nearly time for the morning meeting. "And you shall refuse?" said Yosef. "I shall tell her that it is her right to take the children, and that your mother and I will miss them." "And she will walk away?" "Perhaps, with some help provided by you. If that fails, I will employ the law." Neither man needed to discuss what this meant. The laws of Russia were a shambles. A basis in old Soviet law, assumptions of common sense and vague precedents, smatterings of Western manipulations gleaned from reruns of Law and Order, L.A. Law, Rumpel of the Bailey, and ancient black-and-white episodes of Perry Mason. The law, in short, was whatever the politically appointed and frequently corrupt judges wanted it to be. While corruption and politics pervaded the old Soviet system, there were still occasional communist zealots on the bench who stood behind and believed in the oppressive laws in the books they seldom read. Now the law was written by Kafka. Rostnikov would know how to use that law to rid himself of the suddenly returned mother. His concern was less with getting rid of her than in not adding to the weight of the world the two girls and their grandmother were already carrying. It was only in the past few months that the girls had begun to come out, to talk, to begin to smile and ask for small things. Rostnikov finished the last of his coffee and rose, saying, "Shall we go?" Yosef rose and nodded. Rostnikov picked up his notebook and, with his coffee cup in hand, followed his son to the door. "Karpo and Zelich are not back?" Rostnikov asked as his son opened the door. No. Then, he said as they moved into the corridor, perhaps it will be a short meeting. We can hope, said Yosef, walking next to his father. We're Russians. It's what we do best. There were 3 of them, 2 young men and a young woman. They were nude from the waist up. They were in one bed, looking up sleepily at the 2 odd men who had awakened them in the insane hour of 8 in the morning. "Which one of you is Misha Lovsky?" asked the lean, pale apparition in black slacks, tieless shirt, and jacket. Karpo and Zelich had knocked at the door. They had heard the sound of tired voices inside the apartment. No one had come. They knocked again and waited. When there had been no answer, Karpo had nodded to Zelich, who adjusted his glasses and threw his shoulder against the door. The door flew open with a spray of wood chips and splinters. Karpo had his weapon in hand as Zelich stepped to the side. In front of him, in the single room cluttered with clothes, compact discs, empty liquor bottles, and full ashtrays, was the bed with the trio under a blanket, covered with cartoon figures of a fat man with a flowing white beard and a mass of wild hair. The 3 in the bed should have been frightened. Perhaps they were, but the fear did not fully surface. To Emil Karpo they looked drugged, sleepy, and less than aware that life was a fragile thing. "Misha Lovsky," Karpo repeated, putting his weapon back in the holster under his jacket. The young man on the right side of the bed ran his hand across his shaved head and said to the ghostly figure in front of him, "Cops?" "We are the police," Karpo answered. "We know no Misha Lovsky," the young man said, touching his bald head. "He pays for this apartment," Karpo said. "The naked Cossack pays for this apartment," the young man said. "Who are you?" "Yakov Mitsyn," said Zelich, "known as Acid. The Naked Cossack is the name of the lead singer and of the band. They are the Naked Cossacks." Karpo glanced at his fellow officer. Zelich was a constant enigma, overweight, nearsighted, less than bright. He lived with his mother and blessed his luck at having been assigned to the Office of Special Investigation. He knew he was slow, but Zelich the Slouch was loyal and reliable. He was also a constant surprise to his fellow investigators in moments such as this. "You've got it," said the literally nude young man, pointing a finger at Zelich, who was doing his best not to look at the full breasts of the girl in the middle of the 2 young men. "The Cossack's name is not Lovsky. Lovsky's a Jew name." "What is his last name?" Karpo asked. The 3 looked at each other for an answer. None came. "We never asked. He never mentioned." "And you 2? asked Karpo. "Your names?" "Valery Pulsnov," said the other young man, the youngest of the group, frail blonde hair cropped bristle close, blue-eyed. "Pure Knuckles," said Zelich. "Pure Knuckles," the young man confirmed. The girl reached past Pure Knuckles, her breasts brushing against his chest. Her right hand grabbed a package of cigarettes and a matchbook. She jiggled as she sat upright, lit one of the cigarettes, and lay back. Her hair, cut short in a neat bob, was a flaming and artificial neon red. "And you?" asked Karpo. "Nina Orenskaya," she said. Karpo hesitated for an instant, waiting for Zelich to reveal her colorful identity. Zelich said nothing. This one he did not know. "Anarchista," she said, looking at Zelich and smiling. "Steel ladies," Zelich said. "You know your metal," the girl said with a smile, pointing her cigarette at the bespectacled, rumpled detective, who managed not to blush. "Now I'm with Naked Cossack." "So," said Yakov Mitsyn, who got out of bed, revealing his full naked.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?